right, welcome everybody to another episode of VALR Unfiltered, Money, Meaning in Society. And today I have the great pleasure to talk with G, who is our Chief Operating Officer at VALR. So G, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ben. Excited to be here.
Yes, an unfiltered conversation. I'm generally quite an unfiltered person, which often leads to regret. So I hope this conversation will be within the bounds of propriety. I also hope that we can really get to some insights today. So maybe, as people have noticed from this podcast, I know we have a crypto audience, and we will talk about crypto, but really it's quite broad in scope. And G is one of the most intelligent people that I know. So I'm hoping for a great result for this conversation, G.
Now you're making me nervous, Ben.
I'm also nervous, G. I'm also nervous. I just have a bunch of keywords on my document, and I'm just hoping for that it kind of flows naturally into a meaningful conversation between us.
I think you and I are very capable of speaking for hours on end, so looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
All right, wonderful. All right, G, so maybe before we begin, just for our audience, for those who don't know you, maybe you can take a little bit of time to introduce yourself, and then we'll just jump right in.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone calls me G, as you do. My full name is Gianluca, Italian by birth. I serve as Chief Operating Officer at VALR, have been here for roughly 6 years now. It feels like forever, to be honest with you. But have seen VALR grow from launch effectively, where I was mostly doing client service and looking after the few customers that we had back then, into a really amazing place now, with many people around the world. Our team is spread out all over the place, and really just happy to be along for this very interesting journey that we're on as the world starts to realize the importance of crypto, which is something that thankfully people like you and myself, I think, came to quite early in our lives. Kind of, I think, spoke to us in a way that we needed a financial future that was a little bit different to what existed. Never really felt super comfortable in traditional finance, which is part of my background. I originally worked for a long time in traditional finance. And so, yeah, really, I pinch myself when I think of how far VALR has come and this journey that I've managed to be part of. That's a little bit about me.
Amazing. Now, with you, it's very tempting to talk about kind of the exciting stuff that's happening in crypto. But I think the space is already full of conversations about what's exciting. So actually, for this podcast, what I've planned is first to open up a critical conversation around stablecoins. Now, I don't want people to tune out just because I mentioned stablecoins and they think, there's nothing in that. I think it's an interesting topic. Then after that, it's my intention to go a little bit deeper. Maybe not so much crypto related, but perhaps a bit more philosophical in nature. And then we'll climb back out and reassess the crypto space and the future of this very, very great industry that has indeed excited me for a long time. So stablecoins, stablecoins. Stablecoins are very interesting. Very recently there's been a lot of news. Some major US banks, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citigroup, they're exploring some joint US-backed stablecoin. We've seen some news about Tether, coming into the US with a kind of US-only stablecoin, or at least contemplating such a thing. We know as well that around the world, Tether and Circle as well with their USDC, have made great strides and have played an important role. And so I think before we go deeper, I just want to hear kind of your thinking around the significance of this, because I see a lot of people jumping on this and saying, oh my God, adoption is finally happening. You see, crypto is here to stay, and all of the kind of usual spiel. But I want to question that. But before I do, maybe I just want to hear your top level thoughts around what you think is happening around stablecoins.
Yeah, absolutely. I think stablecoins have become almost a central point of conversation in crypto, haven't they? In recent times, it's important to be aware of the fact, I think, that this is not actually that old. This idea of a stablecoin in crypto, even in the crypto space, right? This is maybe 6, 7 years ago that Tether really started to take off in any kind of meaningful way. And while it seems on the face of it to be one of the more boring parts of this industry, because, like everyone presumes that the whole crypto economy is driven by speculation and number go up and all these ideas of what am I going to invest in to make a hell of a lot of money, probably one of the most important parts of our industry is payments through stablecoins. Now, my feelings towards this part of the market has really kind of changed over time, actually. Going from early days of feeling a little bit nervous that this representation of the US dollar, which is what a stablecoin is, effectively, yeah, nearly the entire stablecoin space is denominated in dollars, right? Was cornered by one company who there was lots of noise around and who everyone thought might not be legitimate. Right? Early on in my journey in crypto, there was a whole lot of FUD around Tether itself. Which, of course, like anyone who just is early into coming to this industry might have gotten caught up in. And I felt a little bit concerned about because I couldn't validate whether, for example, the billions of dollars that were represented by Tether, USDT, actually sat in a bank account anywhere. You couldn't validate that for some time, right? That kind of morphed and changed into me feeling like this is a significant and really important part of our industry around, COVID times, and thereafter, because the whole world was in a weird sort of flux, right? And the only place where you could really store value, if you're thinking about fiat specifically, was in dollars. Every other currency around the world was depreciating against the dollar for a very long time. And so, I mean, I myself benefited from holding dollars, right? In this way, and protecting myself from at least local currency inflation in the place where I live. And so that gave me a lot of like a bullish sentiment towards stables. I thought it was a really important and really useful thing, and I still think that is mostly true. Right, this opens up the ability for people to transact a lot more freely, I think, than has historically been the case. And by freely, I mean really quickly and really cheaply. Right, I can send dollar stable coins in a fraction of a second with final settlement, like really in your possession, within seconds, and it costs me nothing, effectively. And so for a very long time, I held that view that this is super important, a store of value if you're thinking outside of the realm of like Bitcoin, and really useful to people, right? I foresaw a world where more trade would happen directly in dollars in markets outside of the US. Already, it has been the reserve currency forever, and people just natively understand pricing of all assets in dollars, and it drives our global economy presently, the US dollar. And that brings me on to very recent times, as recent as this year, right, where the standing of America and their currency as the central point at which people transact is coming into question again, which is really interesting now, right? And the dollar is actually depreciating against all of the other currencies. And you could foresee a world in which the dollar is not as dominant as it has historically been. And here we see a big change potentially afoot, right? Like there's a question in my mind about whether dollars will be the dominant stablecoin of the future. They have been for a long time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they will be in the future. And I'm curious to see whether we're going to see adoption of stable coins in different currencies, and whether, in fact, something like Bitcoin actually starts to come into its own and to become a central currency that is controlled by no particular government. So at a high level, I think stablecoins are extremely important, but I think they are in a position now where they can't be ignored by any government or any particular market. We're seeing ourselves, right, within VALR that there's a lot of demand for people wanting to transact in stablecoins. And I think the standing of the US and people's interest in holding their currency and the power that that gives them, and increasingly gives them through stablecoin adoption, is coming into question. So it's going to be very interesting to see where this market goes, and whether the US market is able to continue to solidify their standing as the world's reserve currency through dollar stablecoins is like a central theme of both this current administration in the US and the global market. So we'll see.
Very interesting, and very much in line with where I wanted to head anyway. Maybe start with my first concern, because I have two concerns about it. One is that, of course you can see what you say, which is in places like Vietnam or Indonesia or, I don't know, Cambodia, or even South Africa. It's wonderful that people have access to USDT or USDC or some other US dollar pegged stablecoin and kind of hedge against inflation. Fine, sure. However, I think there is a risk, which is that the co-option of these stablecoins leads to yet another permissioned SWIFT-like network where, yes, it can technically flow freely across borders, but in reality, lots of checks and balances and institutions coming in to try and control these capital flows, and governments as well. I don't know if you see that on the horizon, or whether you already see signs of that, or whether you think it's kind of, we're heading into this kind of a split reality, which is sometimes called the splinternet, where, yeah, unfortunately, some folks are stuck in a permissioned world and others do benefit from a permissionless world. How do you see this? Because I think that doesn't excite me, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I'm more so concerned about the involvement of governments, as that increasingly is becoming prominent, than I am with private corporations necessarily. I think, look, like, I am a free markets type of person at heart, and so I imagine that um, businesses are going to do what's best for themselves, and that drives them to do the kind of to offer the kind of services and products that are good for their customers. Otherwise, you have no staying power, especially in today's world, I think. And so, the involvement of businesses and the cornering of the issuance and management of stable coins in a few institutions, I think, is something that we have seen, but I think they don't necessarily have perverse incentives. They're well regulated these days. They have profit as their driving motive, and it's a competitive space in truth, actually, even though there are only a few major issuers of stablecoins. No one wants to lose that throne, right, between Circle and Tether. And so I think they will mostly act in the favor of customers in the future. Hopefully, that's an optimistic view, right? As it stands with governments, I'm less excited, as you put it, right? Because I think control over people's money is something that most people around the world uh, don't think about. Take for granted the fact that the currency in which they transact and store their wealth um, it is what it is, right? It's the option that's available to you. This is something that's come into question with crypto, and becomes something that people actually think about. Like, why is it that my currency is less valuable than some other person's currency, and why is it that I'm struggling to find options to actually store value? And I think part of the answer to that, to those questions, is the fact that governments want control over their economies and over the people in their countries to some degree. And they don't operate in a free market mentality. They operate in a mentality of how do we best manage other priorities. And that isn't always good for people that live in those places, right? And so I worry that increased government involvement means fewer freedoms for people, especially in how they manage their wealth and their currency, the assets that they hold. It's one of the reasons I have been so excited about crypto and Bitcoin specifically, is that it provides greater degrees of freedom to people, right, to transact the way that they want, to hold the assets that they prefer to hold, to participate in a world that is global, right? Like we're not that, even you and I are in different countries, we're able to speak like this over the phone, as if we're sitting in the same room together. The world is smaller than it has ever been in the past, and your money should not be constrained in the way that I think it always has been for the longest time. So I'm not giving you a direct answer about what I think governments will do, but I am worried that they do reduce freedoms of people.
No, I think it's good because we see a lot of celebration about, whether it's a Circle being regulated in Europe or whether it's, a bunch of big banks in the US issuing a stable coin. But I do think we should ask these questions and say, okay, is that a good thing? Is that actually the direction that we as an industry and even the direction of money, should head towards? I think we need to ask those questions.
It's interesting you say that, right? Because like I asked myself the question, would I have expected this industry to develop in any other way? If crypto kind of early on had a fork in the road, there were two paths to take. Either it fades, it never gets real adoption, right? It stays small relatively. It stays cypherpunk. It stays contained with radical type of people. Let me generalize, right? And that would not lead us to needing things like regulation or seeing governments start to get interested in this space. The opposite has actually happened. This has become mainstream. This has become a major industry over time. And because of that fact, of course, it was going to be true that more people would be interested in this, more people would take notes, more people would get involved, and regulators would come in, and regulation would become part of our lives. And so, like, one of the things that I think about is I wish that it was possible to fly under the radar and just, I've got my Bitcoin and I'll be happy forever holding on to that. But the world doesn't work that way. As it becomes more important to all people are start to exert their influences over the crypto market. And so it's unfortunate that we have to be in a position where some of these things are not good, I think, for people or for this industry, but they're necessary.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So I want to share a little anecdote, but I have to share it in a very veiled manner. Many years ago, not that many years ago, a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity, or actually it was just live. I just had to attend a meeting, and it was a closed door meeting. And this was in Hong Kong, and many of the major exchanges were there, and a bunch of other kind of crypto firms, as well as one of the largest stablecoin issuers. And it was just to talk about, regulation was coming to Hong Kong. What does this mean? It seems to be quite harsh. What's going to happen? And anyway, the then CEO of the stablecoin issuer shared a very interesting perspective, which is that they, meaning the stablecoin issuer, doesn't necessarily believe in the longevity of the stablecoin, but rather approaches it as a transitional currency of sorts to eventually onboard the world into the Bitcoin standard. And I thought this was really fascinating, right? Here is not a company that's saying, okay, cool, we have stablecoins. This is going to be our bread and butter for the end of time, until the end of time. But rather, this is the necessary transitional tool, vehicle. And it makes sense to me because, the M2 money supply recently hit another all-time high. And no matter how beautiful we make stablecoins look, even if they're fast and they settle across borders, and people in South Africa or Vietnam have access to a better currency than their own, ultimately, it's tokenized fiat. And ultimately, if you don't believe in the future of fiat, then you cannot, by extension, believe in the future of stablecoins, of those stablecoins at least. So I think that leads to a kind of the bigger conversation of this first part of the podcast, which is, first of all, how do you see that? Do you think that makes sense, that type of thinking? And secondly, if you had to imagine, because we're not just talking about payments, we're not just talking about cross-border flows. Hopefully, we're talking about the future of money. And so, whether or not you believe it's Bitcoin, but let's just say, like, fine, okay, Bitcoin is a wonderful form of money. Maybe not perfect at this moment, maybe not the ideally distributed currency at the moment, because, it's not like the majority of the world holds it. But if we think ahead 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, 100 years, I don't know, how do you see it evolve? So this is the big picture. Yeah. How do you see that evolve?
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer.
Yeah,
I
you can
think
speculate, right? I mean, it's fine, no problem.
absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So let's have some fun with it. I I can't see something like, well, I can't see Bitcoin specifically going away. My personal view is that the cat is out the bag, that it was ever possible for a global reserve asset to be created that is not controlled by anybody. And I think that is what Bitcoin is, in truth. I think you can speak about concentration and the fact that some people hold a lot of it and most people don't have any, and that no one could ever hold much Bitcoin if the entire world does want to invest in this thing, right? But I think those are all points of detail. I think the main point is that we have a truly scarce asset that works and that is adopted and that people are holding because there's this belief that it is a new form of central reserve asset that you need to hold if you want to protect yourself from inflation. The state of the current world also pushes that forward, in my view. If we speak for a moment about present day, I think most people are worried about inflation these days, right? And we see the makings of massive inflation showing up everywhere in the world. And how do you protect yourself from that? It's Bitcoin. There's one trade in the world, and that's the whole Bitcoin, in truth, right? If this is the thing that you're worried about as a person, and I think a lot of people are. Now, that kind of indicates to me that, again, it backs up the hypothesis that this is not an asset that's going to disappear. This has staying power, right? And so if you think forward 100 years, you think to yourself that something like Bitcoin is even more prominent. And like my hypothesis that I've held for a long time is that something like, we potentially, if things work out, go back to something closer to the gold standard that we had many years ago in America, right? Where the fiat currency that you issue is backed by something. It is not just debt; it is backed by an asset. And if we do see a future where Bitcoin becomes the world reserve currency, we have a future where there is some sort of stop and control over government's ability to exert significant influence over economies, right? Like remember today and even right now, right, we see huge deficits in places like America. And that's because the government's literally just spending money that they're creating out of nothing, out of thin air. They're just creating this money and it gets spent, right? And that pushes up asset prices and everyone feels very rich and happy with the results of that presently. But it has a very long time for crypto natives and for, I think, people like you and me. But it's something that's concerning, right? That we feel like there's a problem there. If you're just printing money out of thin air to buy real assets and think that you can continue to do that forever, it feels like a Ponzi scheme. And so I feel like that does eventually have to correct itself. People need to, people need to find moderation in specifically governments in how they issue currency and how that's managed. And so, look, I think if I think forward 100 years, I still believe that, if anything in the crypto space has staying power, is Bitcoin. Yeah, and I think it becomes more important over time.
Yeah, I think so too. And we just have to see. I mean, the money printing of the US dollar and other fiat currencies is never going to stop. So the trend is clear. And over time, it's kind of logical to say people will get more educated about Bitcoin, as they have over the past 15 years. So fast forward 100 years, more people will be educated. And the more educated people are, hopefully they would make an educated move, right? With money, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I think something that I think we've spoken about previously. At least this is, in fact, this is my perspective right now. Right, is that if you think about crypto, there's kind of two things that have really gained traction, and there's a lot of other stuff that's experimental. The two things that have gained traction are non-sovereign money, Bitcoin, and dollar stablecoins. Those are two things that are like widely used, have obviously gained real traction in the world, and almost, based on what we're saying, fight against each other to some degree, don't they? You've got like the prevalence and permutation of specifically dollars throughout the world in a more easily accessible manner, and then you've got non-sovereign money, which protects you from the inflation of the former. And so it's really interesting how this industry is playing out.
Yeah, it is very interesting. So I think that's pretty cool. I want to come back to Bitcoin a little bit later. So now it's like time for us to go into a bit of an interesting topic. So bear with me. Because G, I think a lot about human nature. I guess that is in my nature, to think about human nature. And I have this concept that while we are all different and we all find different things interesting and get excited by different things, I think that the human heart, has a natural attraction to beauty and to knowledge. And so I'll go deeper as we go. But before we go, I just want to ask you, on a personal note, what are some things that in life, right, that you find beautiful?
Interesting question. You did not prep me for this, to be clear for
I
the
know.
audience.
No, but it can be. I mean, I can also start, but it's very broad. Just I want to come
Yeah.
to some idea of beauty. Yeah.
So there's a few things. I guess firstly, let me start with like cerebrally, right? Like in my brain, what where I find a lot of beauty. It might sound a bit trite, but like I find a lot of beauty in performance, and I mean that through like work, like feeling like you're really working at the top of your game. I find that quite beautiful, actually. So feeling like you're in flow, feeling like you are learning something. You spoke about knowledge. For me, like wisdom more than knowledge is really beautiful, right? Like understanding, gaining some sort of understanding about this weird and wonderful world that we live in, how and how to manage it in a way that you can be happy, is something. There's beauty in that, in my mind. Then there's obviously much beauty in the world around us if you actually stop to look outside the window,
Right.
and just take
Flowers.
note, right? Yeah, just
Yeah.
literally just being like, and this is something I think I remind myself of and don't do enough of, is just being present in the place that you're in, right? Like stopping and sitting in the garden and looking at the trees and listening to the wind and all of that. Like, we actually are extremely lucky that we live on this little planet in this massive solar system, right? And have the natural beauty in front of us. Like, not all people, even on this planet, get access to that real, just natural beauty. But for those of us that do have that at our fingertips, it's something to take note of, and it's something that I try to remind myself of, that like there's just a huge amount of beauty in nature. Could speak about my wife and kids, but that goes without saying. I see a lot of beauty in that as well, right? And specifically at this stage of my life, uh, innocence of like little ones has come forward as something really beautiful because it's something I observe now, right? Is that there's these little humans that don't have preconceptions about the US economy and the state of crypto and existential stuff, any problems like this. They just see the world in front of them and enjoy it. And that for me is extremely beautiful. And it kind of reminds me of the fact that part of what, and the last thing that I think I'd mention is that freedom in my mind is really beautiful, right? Like being free to be yourself and to live your life the way that you want to is something important to me and something that I find really beautiful.
This is very great, and of course, there's a reason that I'm bringing it up, because I think first of all, it's important. We want to talk about money, we want to talk about technology, but to do so from a deeply grounded human perspective, I think is valuable. And the reason I bring up beauty and knowledge as kind of with the idea that all human beings are naturally attracted to these, is to acknowledge that we do have something in common, and that of course somebody might really find beauty in nature, as most people would do probably. There might be some people who don't care about nature, but maybe they find beauty in music or beauty in art or whatever it is, right? It doesn't really matter. Shiny objects, cars. And you can see where I'm going, because I'm slowly, want to talk about the crypto space. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, I try to sometimes look at the adoption of Bitcoin through a lens of, is it driven by some type of, inner drive? Is there something to it that's beyond just like, oh, cool, I want to get rich? And so, as you know, currently so I'll come to it. As you know, currently I'm in Vietnam, and Vietnam is a beautiful country, but it's also a place where death is really an everyday reality. So every evening, if I drive out to go get a coffee in this little alleyway, I see a bunch of dead rats. They've been, probably killed by a motorbike. The other day, I planted some roses. Unfortunately, they died. Mm-hmm. There's countless of traffic accidents with tragic outcomes, young people, old people. To make it even bigger, like throughout history, empires have come and gone. Languages have come and gone. Different types of money have come and gone. Entire cities that were once very vibrant have turned into deserts. Creatures that once roamed the earth, they're gone. Planets, moons, suns, they've all come and gone. Time that was once before us in our childhood is now behind us. And I don't want to make it dark, but through this kind of lens, just the recognition that everything comes and goes, I see a search for a store of value. And much more than that, I see a search among all people in the world, whether or not they like Bitcoin, that's neither here nor there, a search for what is truly enduring. And again, so, just like beauty and knowledge, kind of everybody can be attracted to it. However, what we find beautiful and what type of knowledge we pursue differs per person. It just depends on your free will, where you direct your heart. Similarly, I think we're all in search of something that's truly enduring. And I want to open up that, hopefully it's not a can of worms, I hope, that box of jewels, and talk with you a little bit about what is truly enduring. And I don't know if we'll get somewhere, but let's see where we go. In your mind, what is truly enduring and worth spending your time and effort on?
Look, I'm an Italian, and so you might presume that things like fast cars and big houses and that sort of thing are in my veins, right? In my history.
Right.
But I think when I think about this, based on what you're literally just right now, right? Based on your question,
Yes.
what comes to me is the fact that throughout history, the thing that persists is wisdom. Not knowledge necessarily by itself, but knowing how to use knowledge to actually advance society. And this is one of the things that you could put your finger on and really believe has endured, right? Is that over like the long human history that we have, the thing we know are like the books that people have written, the stories that people tell, the things that they learned and shared and passed on through generations, and that's led us where we are now through much trial and error and many mistakes and lots of fights, right? Like humanity has found a way to move forward and persist and figure out how to get better over time through knowledge and wisdom. So, like, if I had to take one step forward and say, how's that represented in the world? Um, Tongue in cheek, you could say Bitcoin is a store of knowledge as much as it's a store of value, because it is literally a full transaction record of everything that everyone has ever done using Bitcoin, right? Transparent ledger. But tongue in cheek, that's reaching a bit, I guess. But for me, what endures is that, right? It's people's learning. It's how that's passed forward and how people continue to develop and learn from their mistakes and get smarter.
No, maybe actually it's a good point. What you mentioned about Bitcoin is rather than saying, okay, cool, here's another new flashy innovation, you could also say it is the outcome of perhaps centuries of learning. Because we always like to refer to the Roman Empire and how they played around with gold coins and basically diluted the money supply. We've gone through decades of being off the gold standard, and we can kind of see the results of that. So you could say Bitcoin is a result, is kind of a next step in wisdom. As a humanity want to approach money, I think that is fair. That's a fair thing to say. And ultimately, because I really, I don't know, I find it very interesting, like what drives us. And, let's say if you save Bitcoin, dollar cost averaging, every month you buy some Bitcoin. In the beginning, it's perhaps a bit scary because of the volatility. But let's say a decade in, actually the volatility, if you believe in the endurance of Bitcoin, actually it doesn't really bother you that much, right? It's up and down. It's kind of, okay, cool. You're not looking to spend it all in a single day. It's just there, and it grows, and sometimes it shrinks a little bit. So there's something to being in the asset for a long time, and you could kind of you could extend that to the whole of humanity. Like, let's say 50 years in, like it's going to be less scary. It's going to be less risky as well. Now, I don't know. I mean, look, everything is relative. So ultimately, nothing is enduring. Ultimately, maybe we need to leave this planet and the planet won't endure. Like, there's a whole bunch of things. Like, the sun is going to expire. Like, fine, it's all relative. But I see the uptake of Bitcoin as part of humanity's search for something that's actually enduring. Because if you received $10 million right now, and it just sits in your bank account, I know you feel good for a while, but is that going to be your plan? For the next few generations? Is that it? Or are you actually going to be worried and be like, but you know what? That's not enduring. That is not great. How do you see it? Like, do you emotionally, I don't know, connect to these assets and, this search for enduring assets?
Yeah, I think this is like a very big problem for everybody, right? If you've got $10 million today, it's not $10 million in a year's time even, right? Not in purchasing power. This is the whole central point of inflation, is that like the way our world is set up today, it's to drive you to consume, right? To actually spend that money, to do something with it. Most of the world doesn't save properly, I think. I think that's true to say, right? Most of the world will spend what they have in pursuit of, goods and services that they value higher than the kind of stored up energy that having some amount of money gives you. This has come into question and been challenged by something like Bitcoin, at least very much so in, I guess in our lived experience of it over the last 7 to 10 years, of saying, I have conviction in this being a store of value. I think most people don't understand that. And so I want as much of this as I can get because I know it's limited. I know it's actually scarce. It's truly scarce. and
Mhm.
not everyone can have one BTC. Not everyone can have 0.01 BTC, right, around the world. And so I'm gonna take as much of it as I can get, because it is, in my view, at least, stored energy. It helps me
Mhm.
protect that ability to buy or consume the things I want in the future safely, in a way I don't have to
Mhm.
think too hard about, right? And this is like partly where the whole investment industry comes from, right? In that, people actually pay advisors and others to go and invest their money so that they have this same outcome, stored value, that actually stays the same, or grows, right? This is like what everyone is looking for in the world for the most part. So, like, do I think that there's a single solution for that? I'm not sure, because
Mhm.
I always have in my mind the practical consideration that, like, we're not as early in the journey of Bitcoin and crypto as we were 5, 6, 7 years ago, when it was, like,
Mhm.
at least in my world, obvious that this is the best thing that I could own. Right now, I think, don't get me wrong, I think it continues its path of adoption, and that we're not done with price discovery in something like Bitcoin. But I think it's very hard to say that any one thing, any one asset will endure forever. I could
Mhm.
pose a perspective, right? And I said earlier that I think in 100 years' time, Bitcoin's still going to be around and be important. It's not going to be the only thing that's important, right?
Yes.
Sending your kids to an amazing school, experiences, traveling the world,
Mhm.
buying your spouse something nice. Like, these things also matter to people, matter to me, right? And so,
Mhm.
um, yeah, I think of it less as what asset is most enduring in the world, and more so what asset holds energy sufficiently for
Mhm.
me that I can be
Mhm.
confident that it's going to protect me from inflation, grow in value against the stuff that I want to buy in the future. And that's the answer to me.
I think it's very great because I was going to ask you, like, if you're spending, because people's spending behavior changes when they hold Bitcoin. That's very clear. I know there's a whole culture in the crypto space where people want to buy a Lambo and whatever it is, like whatever. Actually, it sounds very old fashioned now. Um, so for me, like, I have specific things that are worth it for me to actually sell and spend my Bitcoin, and it's definitely not new shoes. You know what I mean? Like, that's not worth it for me. Um, but but in terms of for you, like, just you mentioned a few of these things. Like, what are the things that are worth actually, even at this stage, even if you know it'll 10x or 100x in 50 years, 60 years, what's worth spending the Bitcoin on?
Why spend it when you can borrow against it?
Okay, that's a very smart answer.
So, I mean, and yeah, like, this is something we've spoken about strategically, right? Like, I think, like myself, crypto native people, those that have conviction in the assets they hold, they don't want to spend it if they can avoid spending it, and have other means to, like, maybe even saying, I would like to spend some money today, knowing that the assets that I hold are going to go up in value, and I can pay that off later, right? In the same fiat currency. And that's where, like, the idea of crypto loans comes from, for VALR specifically.
Mhm.
Um, I want to afford people the opportunity to have conviction in something and not have to sell Bitcoin, for example, but instead be able to borrow even fiat currency against it. Go and do what you need
Mhm.
to do, right? Of course,
Mhm.
everybody's going to need to spend some money. You can't get through life without that. And if you're in the fortunate position where you're able to hold assets like this and earn a salary, and you can pay off a debt over time, you can do that, right? And you haven't sold the thing that you think is going to go up 10x.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, I think that's one view, and that's kind of, if I had to lay out the options that make sense to me, that is one that definitely makes sense. The other is that, and it's funny, like, if I think about VALR, there's a lot of very different personalities at VALR, right? Like, there's some people who are extremely religious, some who are not so. Um, and, like, for me, I think your life is short. I don't know what comes afterwards, right? And so,
Mhm.
like, I hold the perspective that even if, like, say something like being able to borrow against Bitcoin and and hold on to it is not available to me. Like, am I going to liquidate some of that and spend it? Yes, because there are other objectives in my life as well. Speaking very frankly, right, and openly, like, this is, for me, important that people live their lives and get value and enjoyment out of the stored energy, out of the assets that they hold. You want to, of course, leave some for the next generation and your kids and everything to have as well. But there's something beautiful in being able to give them a lot of experiences through this stuff. So I would sell, shock horror, at some point if I needed to.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense, G. Like, my own bad memories, I guess. My own, practices have really changed over time. I remember there was a time when I was trading a lot of futures,
Yeah.
and like, I don't know, mid bull market, and I'd be going out, with a bunch of friends, and I'd look at my position, open position, and be like, oh, it's awesome. I'm in so much profit. You know what? I'm just going to go and spend it tonight. You know what I mean? And I would spend the profits of those of the long, either by closing it and actually just spending it, or just spending it and then coming back home and the next morning seeing that I'm no longer in a in a very good position. So I've had my own learning curve with this type of very badly managed trading. That has changed a lot. And not a lot of things now are. So I just accumulate Bitcoin. Not a lot of things are worth selling it for or spending my Bitcoin on. But at the same time, as you mentioned, there are many viewpoints. I think something like if you really want to help somebody, or some form of charity, or you already know my view on Persian rugs. Like, there's things that I think are beautiful, and not everything that that you own has to 10x. Some things will 10x in meaning. I have a picture, you can't see it, a bunch of pictures behind me, but one of the pictures that I have in my home is something that was already in my grandmother's home 50 years ago. And so for me, that has 10x in value, even though the monetary value might not be, neither here nor there. So the, nostalgic objects and these types of things, memories. So I think, to me,
Sorry.
No,
I think we can get caught up in the idea that the central point of life is making enough money, right? Or, like, even if you think of it slightly differently, like I've described, right? Even if you think of it as being able to store energy for the future through money, right? I guess, again, going back to are you sitting down and looking at the trees outside every now and then? It comes to me sometimes that there's a lot of other things in life that are important.
Yes.
Yes. Like we are fortunate and unfortunate to work in a space where your mind is consumed by this stuff, right? Like you're every day thinking about financial products, actually, and how we're gonna move forward towards serving more people and increasing adoption and educating and all these good things. There's a lot of, but there are many other priorities as well. And I say this as someone who has also dabbled in a lot of losing trades over the years.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the reason, so I'll head to my final two questions. Part of the reason why I wanted to bring this whole up is because I think personally it's very important for us all to reflect, especially if you're deep into crypto. And, when you look at the crypto space, you can see a very wide spectrum. There's people who religiously accumulate Bitcoin. There's people who religiously trade any asset under the sun, who want to jump on the newest token, whatever it is. There's a lot of that stuff. And there's a lot of spending as well. Like, you go to Token 2049 in Dubai. It's nice and flashy, but you could also say a lot of money has been wasted on fireworks and, whatever it is, flashy stuff. Whatever your perspective might be, I think, you can put money to better use. But again, that's my view, whatever. I hope there's some evolution in kind of our approach to money. And from that perspective, when you look at the crypto space as a whole, whether you start from 15 years ago until now, or even just look at a snapshot, of the space in the now, you could say there's a lot of, it's still quite frivolous in a sense. Like there's a lot of frivolity in the space. You know, how do you see this logically evolve? I know you're a free market lover, so maybe there's still a lot of that. You know, Jack Mallers, for example, right? Jack Mallers, he basically says, you know, exchanges like Coinbase or whatever it is, you know, they are benefiting from the the hedge. They're basically profiting of ignorance in a sense. So there is a really great form of money, and then there's a lot of frivolous innovation around it, and you know there's money to be made, and so that's where exchanges get their benefit from. I'll come to VALR in a bit, but maybe first we can talk about the crypto space and how do you see that evolve? Are we going to stay frivolous? Is that the eternal direction of this space, or do you see focus coming into the space ultimately?
Mm. A part of me really hopes that we stay young in our mentality in the crypto space. There's something that worries me. I'm not sure this will actually happen, but I think frivolity is definitely something that you can observe in crypto, and unfortunately, there are absolutely people who love that, right? Love to peacock and flaunt the fact that they have been right in investing in something and have made a lot of money. That's a distraction in my mind. Like for me, what's really interesting and exciting, even in all of the work that's being done outside of stablecoins and Bitcoin, right? All of the stuff that you kind of alluded to, these other projects and assets available on Coinbase or VALR, or you know, a multitude of different experiments that are being run. I think that's amazing, actually, right? I think what you observe as frivolity in one respect of people having taken a punt, gambled, whatever the case may be, and have made a lot of money, put that aside. But think about all of the work and new thoughts and experiments that people are running to try and build a better financial system. And I think there are people trying to do that, right, in the space. It has attracted that type of person who is forward thinking, technology forward, wants to think about a better future and wants to build towards that future. I think that's what we're observing in this like hot pot of a wide range of experiments that are being run. A lot of them end up being worth nothing, right, and go to zero. But I think that's fine. That's what you expect when you're running experimentation and trying to build new things. You expect a little bit of mess along the way, a few mistakes, right? Many mistakes to be made. And so my hope is that the crypto space stays young in mentality, in that we keep being optimistic about the future, keep wondering about a better future and how to build that, right? And there's magic in that, I think. And I think you see that nowhere else in the financial world so much as you see it in crypto. Very young people, actually, like building really interesting products and infrastructure that people are using, right, and have value for someone. We spoke about derivatives trading and gambling, and going out and putting positions on. That has value for some people, and that's their decision, right? That's up to them about how they choose to employ their time. And you find amazing products in crypto that serve that need. And I'm excited about that. I think it's the way that we get to a better future. Again, the reason I lean towards preferring free markets over anything else is that I hate the idea of stifling people's ideas and their ability to innovate through my own, for example, concerns about how someone should behave, right? I'd never want to apply my own yardstick to help other people live their lives. That's why I love free markets and freedom. I think that's how you get to a beautiful future, is you allow people to live their life the way they want to.
Yeah, makes sense, actually. So in a sense, you envision a crypto space, an industry that enables people to innovate, to experiment, and then it's up to people themselves to come to their wisdom or to come to their focus or not.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's a game of statistics. Like probably most people will gravitate towards something that's enduring. And then you have people who love to be on the fringes. And it's always been like that, of course, right? In different, like maybe in art or in music or whatever it is. So yeah, I agree with you. Okay, I'll head to my final question, G, because we have now covered 1 hour, almost. 55 minutes actually. So let me head to the final question. We've come back to reality. And, VALR is, of course, a wonderful exchange, wonderful institution. Now, how do we ensure that this institution endures? And how do you see that? Because hopefully when that time comes that Bitcoin is still around in 100 years, VALR will also still be around. And I know, yes, it could be that people are still innovating and experimenting, and we'll have different types of flower tokens and, the atoms of the universe, all of this stuff tokenized. But let's assume that we're just heading towards a very mature, globally inclusive, interplanetary financial system. Like, where is VALR? How do we make sure that VALR endures?
Yeah. It's amazing to me that VALR's gotten to this point even, and managed to survive many challenges over the short life that we've lived even, right, as a business. And I think one of the consistent things that's offered us the ability to become a major player in the markets we serve. And we are very big in places like South Africa and a few other places. Is that we care less about what is flashy and what is topical, and more about how we serve people. I think I mentioned right at the beginning, but I think in a world that is more free, those businesses and endeavors that actually give good service to people and offer like amazing products to people are the ones that endure, right? And I've always felt that that's true of VALR thus far. That we've at least our intention has always been to build really like the best product and offer the very best service that we can for the people that we serve, whoever they may be, and however many they end up being, right? And we've got more than 1 million customers today, who I hope we, for the most part, manage to serve well. And continuing to keep that as the North Star, I think, is what moves you forward, what keeps you relevant. The space will change. I'm pretty certain of that. And different parts of the crypto market will wane, and others will come forward as even more important. And there could be a future where all that people want to do is just buy their monthly Bitcoin, right? DCA in, as you said, over time. And if that's the case, then we'll be there to do that, I think.
Or
And
earn
hopefully we'll
Bitcoin
be
if
one
you
of the
can't.
yeah.
Yeah.
If you can't buy it, go and earn it somehow. So all these things, I think it's unclear in 100 years what the future holds. Obviously that's true. But if you do your best to serve people well, people recognize that. I think that's the best answer I can give you on this point. There's a whole lot of detail about how we're building our products and what we're optimizing for. And I myself have worked for the last couple of years with our team trying to build out leverage trading specifically, which you might think of as shiny and just the topical thing. But I really think that underneath the surface, what's really important to me at least is that we build the infrastructure to support a future that is more digital, where people are using crypto more. I think that I'm willing to make the hypothesis that is true, and that we serve people well, and those are my focus.
I think it's beautiful. I think intention is was one of the keywords that I didn't address, but you brought it up. I think intention is what's truly enduring, the intention behind our things and our actions. So yeah, I see that as well. I think VALR is pretty committed to providing good, genuine service, and that's a principle that you can fast forward 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and that would still matter, right? So, all right, G, this was a wonderful, unfiltered conversation. I think it's interesting. So I'm happy that we
Thanks
had
for
this
having me,
chat.
Ben. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great.
Now, please don't hang up. even though I'm going to end the call for our listeners, but please don't hang up. And chat to you soon, G.
Thanks,
Thank
mate.
you very much.